The beggar with 4 flowers walked along the street. The wind blew around him, and the sand was whisked up into the air. The 4 flowers he held gently in his hand were becoming covered in sand and dirt. As the beggar let out a sigh, the 4 flowers, their heads unbowed, strained towards the sun. All around him, the noise of shoppers and traders filled the air. Their chatter was interspersed with the sound of music and the laughter of small crowds entertained by various kinds of street performers. Many of the market traders and some of the shoppers knew the beggar by sight. 1 or 2 would even say hello when he passed them. Those shoppers who were infrequent visitors to the market did not know of the beggar and the curious fact that he made the same journey, at the same time every day, always carrying the same 4 simple-looking flowers. Many found the beggar to be an unremarkable sight and so ignored him. His grim and withered complexion made him unappealing to look at. His odor made him unpleasant to be near, and his stooping and slow gait, even without a cane, made him look older than he was. Yet, despite his dress, complexion, smell and gait, he was only a young man of 21 years. Those acquainted with his habits looked upon him with pity and pondered what caused his blindness. But being blind, he could not see and so could not react with a smile to their kindness. Even if he could see, he would probably have found their kindness undeserving, given the weight of guilt burdening his heart. The beggar suddenly stopped and turned towards the edge of the pavement and strained to listen to the noise about him for approaching carts that could knock him down. When he felt it was safe to cross, the beggar walked along the well-worn road to reach the resting place of his family's ancestral tomb that lay on top of the hill. The beggar heard a cart coming towards him from a distance and tried to cross the road as quickly as he could, but he was not fast enough. Just as the beggar got halfway across the road, the cart came speeding towards him. Although he heard it coming, he could not see it, so he did not know which way to turn to avoid it. The cart plowed ahead directly towards the beggar. It looked sure to crush him under its wheels. Some onlookers winced at the thought of what was going to befall the blind beggar. But just as the horse and cart were about to crash into him, the driver of the cart managed to rein in the horses and stop the cart. The cart stopped with such violence that the driver was thrown from the driver's seat onto the road. As the driver picked himself up and dusted himself down, he saw the beggar on the ground. Being concerned for the beggar's welfare, "Are you all right?" the driver asked. "Why yes, I'm okay," the beggar said, feeling weak-kneed. "I'm really sorry about that. I lost control of the horses for a moment." "That's okay," the beggar said as he stretched out his hand to gently stroke the horse near him. "Once again, I am really sorry about what happened," the driver said. "Can I at least offer you some food and drink? I feel awful for what has happened." "I shall not accept anything but yes," the driver said with a beaming smile and jovial voice. The beggar was reluctant to accept the driver's offer at first, but there was something gentle and good-natured in the driver's voice that called out to the beggar. "Yes, I will accept your hospitality," the beggar said. "But I can't offer you anything in return. Your company for a short period is payment enough," the driver said as he slapped the beggar on the back and laughed good-naturedly. As the driver of the cart helped the beggar across the road and towards a small inn that served food and refreshments, people in their path began to bow to the driver. The driver, you see, was none other than the royal prince. The beggar, unaware of the royal prince's true identity, found the chairs being scraped back in unison quite curious. While the beggar could not see the men bowing and the women curtsying, he knew his companion was more than just a driver. Suddenly, before the beggar could say anything else to the royal prince, they were seated at a table with a meal before them. "I don't know your name," the beggar said to the royal prince. "Please, could you tell me your name so that I may thank you for your kindness?" "I would prefer to remain anonymous for the moment," the prince royal said. "As you may have heard when we entered, people act differently around me when they know who I am." "I'm glad you said that," the beggar said with a mischievous smile on his face. "I was beginning to think it was the way I smell." "I don't think it helped," the prince royal said as he burst out into shared laughter with the beggar. The customers and staff in the inn did not know what to make of the sight of the prince royal sitting and sharing a meal and a drink with a common beggar. The prince royal and the beggar both finished their meals and sat at ease in each other's company. "I can't thank you enough for your kindness," the beggar said. "It was nothing. I have enjoyed your company," the prince royal said as he leaned forward. "But tell me how you come to be a beggar?" The blind beggar shifted uncomfortably in his seat, which the royal prince noticed immediately. "If you are worried that what you reveal to me will make me think less of you, I promise you that I will not judge you, for no one is without flaws." The prince royal tapped the beggar gently on the arm to reassure him that his words were valid. The blind beggar smiled uncertainly. "Please speak without fear of prejudice," the prince royal said with a warm smile on his lips. The event that led to my blindness was one of many in a long series of events that I cultivated by my own hands. Seeds sown with my own thoughts blossomed into the man you see before you. It was ultimately my own wickedness that caused my blindness. Continue, the prince royal said, the curiosity in him growing with each minute. One day, my father and brother got up and took the sheep out onto the hills to graze as was their routine. Sadly, one or two of the sheep had gotten lost and wandered deep into the forest. First, my father went to look for them, but when he didn't return, my brother went to look for my father and the missing sheep. At the same time as my father and brother were in the forest, the rich man who owned the forest had his agents out in force trying to catch poachers. The rich man's agents mistook my father and brother for poachers and opened fire, killing them instantly. "That's awful," the Prince Royal said as he stretched out a hand to comfort the beggar who had started to weep from his lifeless eyes as he told his story. The rich man's agents regretted the death of my father and brother and offered a considerable amount as recompense. Yet as head of the family, I declined the gift. But I did not decline it because I believed no amount of money could compensate for the loss of those I loved. No, I refused their payment out of anger and hatred. At the time, I lifted the money they offered and threw it at them with such violence that the coins that struck them left cuts on their heads. The anger I felt that day descended upon me like a plague of locusts and devoured any gentle feelings within me. "What happened to the rest of your family?" the Prince Royal asked as he encouraged the beggar to tell his story. On hearing of my father and brother's deaths, my mother and sister dealt with their grief in different ways. My mother took to her bed, for she was unable to cope with the loss of her youngest son and the only man she had loved since she was a young woman, my father. While I was consumed by my thirst for revenge, my sister took care of my mother. Once a week, she made her way into the city to purchase some flowers, which she would lay on our ancestral tomb, where my father and brother lie to this day, and which is but a short walk from here. The beggar stopped talking, unsure if his companion was shocked or offended by his past conduct. "Please, continue," the Prince Royal said with a warm, comforting tone in his voice that reassured the beggar. As the beggar continued his story, almost every ear was listening. Some of the staff and customers had shushed their own conversation and leaned towards the Prince Royal and the beggar, straining to hear the rest of the story. But the beggar, being blind, was unable to understand how much interest his story had generated in those around him. Of course, not everyone was as open and gracious as the Prince Royal. One or two people lurking in the corners in the deepest of shadows were already shaking their heads in judgment, even though they were not above reproach themselves. My heart was filled with the desire to kill the rich man who owned the forest, the beggar said as he lowered his head. I learned everything about the rich man, his likes and dislikes, his habits and inclinations. In time, I came to know him more than I knew myself. He became so familiar to me that it felt like I was him, as mad as that sounds. I learned that the rich man made his way into the city on the last day of every month to deposit his funds into the bank. After visiting the bank, I knew he attended a lunch with his business partners in this very inn. I watched the rich man over many months do this enough times to know for sure where he would be so that the bomb I had built would go off at the right moment and kill him instantly. What I didn't know was that on the day I planned to kill the rich man, my sister was in the city and, as she usually did, went to the florist to buy flowers to place where my father and brother lay. So, as fate would have it, at the moment the bomb was about to go off, my sister was walking past this inn. I did not see her until it was too late. I had the rich man in my sight, and I was blind to anyone and anything else. When he walked towards the inn, I set the bomb to detonate on a timer. It was only after the bomb had begun to count down that I noticed my sister. I tried to disarm the bomb, but it continued its deadly countdown. I knew if I didn't warn my sister, she would be killed. I called out to her, but she couldn't hear me above the noise of the crowd. I ran towards her, but it was too late. The bomb went off. It killed the rich man, my sister, and many others instantly. I was within the blast range, so I was struck by glass and bits of flying debris. The last thing I remember seeing was the lifeless hand of my sister still clutching the flowers. When I woke in a hospital still alive, all I wanted to do was die. I could not face what I had done. As the beggar finished his sentence, chairs were scraped back from tables as a few of the people who had friends and family who also died in the explosion stood up. The Prince Royal, sensing the atmosphere in the inn shift, raised his hand, which held the great seal of the kingdom, and everyone obeyed without question. It displayed in front of them was enough to deter anyone from doing the beggar any harm. Unable to contain their anger in the presence of the beggar, the people who had lost friends and family in the explosion left the inn while drawing hate-filled looks at the beggar. I know that I do not deserve pity for my blindness. I have reaped what I have sown, the beggar said. At the time, I could not see the suffering of my mother and sister, and so chose hate instead of forgiving the rich man. I should have looked after my mother and sister as my father and brother would have. As much as I might hope to, I cannot undo the fact that I am responsible for the deaths of many people who had no part in the events that led. But why did you stay in the city? The Prince Royal asked. When I woke after the bomb went off, I found myself in a hospital and completely blind. Although I was affected greatly by the loss of my sight, I made my way back to my family home. When I entered the building, although blind, I could smell death in the air. I fumbled my way into my mother's room and found that she was dead. Her cold, lifeless body had been decaying for days. It seemed that, while I was in hospital, my mother had died of a broken heart. No one was there to check on her, for no one knew she was alone and that my sister was dead. When I returned to the village and they heard the rumors about the bomb that killed my sister, they treated me with kindness I did not deserve. They thought I was a victim of the bomb blast and not the perpetrator. I tried to confess, to tell people that I was responsible, but they thought I had been driven mad by all that I had lost. I was in hell. People were being kind to me, but I knew that it was undeserved. All I could think about was that I did not have the funds to transport my mother and sister's bodies to our ancestral tomb and lay them next to my father and brother. But one day, an agent of the rich man's family appeared. Laboring under the mistaken idea that I was a victim of the bomb, they told me that the rich man's family had offered to pay for my mother and sister's bodies to be transported to our ancestral tomb. For my mother and sister's sake, I took the offer. Now, they are both lying in our ancestral tomb with my father and brother. After my mother and sister were laid to rest, I planned to confess my role in the death of those who died in the bomb blast. Yet no matter how many times I tried to confess, no one believed me. No one thought it was possible that the son of a simple farmer could make a bomb that could kill someone so rich and powerful. Maybe they didn't want to believe it. Perhaps it was easier for them to believe in some grand conspiracy involving vested interests that acted together to kill the rich man. I don't know. All I know is that I was not punished for my actions. I decided that the only thing I could do was follow my sister's devotion. So, I began buying flowers to place on my family's ancestral tomb. As I spent a lot of time wandering aimlessly throughout the city, I found that whenever I sat down to rest, people would put a few coins in my hand. I used those coins to buy food to sustain myself and to purchase flowers for my family's ancestral tomb. When the occasion arose that I had money to spare, I gave it away to those who, through no fault of their own, had fallen on hard times. So, that's how I ended up in the city, and our paths crossed. You are very silent, please speak. I must confess I am shocked by your story, the prince. Royal said. I cannot justify your actions, but I cannot condemn you either. You have suffered greatly at your own hand. It seems to me that to punish you further would be pointless. As Prince Royal, I proclaim that for the rest of your life, you shall not be harmed because of your actions. Instead of a long sentence or an agonizing death, I ask you to agree to tell your story to all that will listen so that they might learn from you and avoid a similar fate. The dead cannot forgive you, but maybe the living can learn compassion and forgiveness in how they treat you, and perhaps you can remind them that an eye for an eye makes the whole world blind.